There are deaths that shake a generation, and then there are deaths that shake the world so hard it never fully rights itself again. The murder of Tupac Amaru Shakur on September 13, 1996, was one of those deaths. He was 25 years old. He had sold more than 75 million records. He had movies in the pipeline, music already recorded that the world had not yet heard, and a mind so restless and so gifted that people who knew him genuinely believed he had not yet come close to his ceiling. And then, 6 days after a gunman in a white Cadillac opened fire on the Las Vegas Strip, he was gone, just like that, 25 years old. And for 27 years after that, not a single person was charged with his murder. Not one. The streets knew. The music world knew. Everyone, it seemed, knew something. And yet the case sat cold, frozen in place, a wound that never closed. My name is not important. What is important is this. As of 2026, the trial of the only man ever charged in connection with Tupac's murder is scheduled to begin on August 10th of this year in a Las Vegas courtroom. His name is Duane Keith Davis, known to the streets as Keffe D. He has been behind bars since September 2023. He has pleaded not guilty, and the world, the millions of people who grew up with Tupac's voice in their ears, who memorized his lyrics, who wept when he died, who have never stopped asking who pulled that trigger, is finally going to get its day in court. Whether that day delivers justice is a question no one can answer yet. But before we get there, before we sit in that courtroom and watch nearly 3 decades of secrets finally face a judge and a jury, I want to take you back to the beginning. Not to Las Vegas, not to the Strip, not to the night of September 7th, 1996. I want to take you back to East Harlem, New York, in the summer of 1971. Because to understand how Tupac Shakur died, you first have to understand how he lived. And that story, the real, full, unvarnished story, is one that will take your breath away. Welcome to the Untold True Crime Stories. Stay with me from the very beginning to the very end tonight, because this is one of those cases where every single chapter matters. If you have never subscribed to this channel, please do it right now. Hit that notification bell, because we have a new full documentary dropping every single week, and you do not want to miss what is coming. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And do you believe justice is finally coming for Tupac Shakur? On June 16, 1971, a boy was born in East Harlem, Manhattan, New York City, whose name at birth was Lassane Parrish Crooks. He would not carry that name for long. His mother, Alice Faye Williams, who had renamed herself Afeni Shakur after joining the Black Panther Party, changed her son's name when he was just 1 year old. She renamed him Tupac Amaru, after Tupac Amaru II, an 18th-century Peruvian revolutionary, a descendant of the Inca rulers, who was executed by the Spanish colonial authorities in 1781 after leading a rebellion against their rule. Afeni Shakur explained her reasoning simply and powerfully. She said she wanted her son to have the name of revolutionary indigenous people in the world. She wanted him to know he was part of a world culture and not just from a neighborhood. That is an extraordinary thing to say about a 1-year-old child. And it tells you something essential about the world Tupac was born into. A world of politics and conviction and fierce, uncompromising identity. His mother, Afeni, was not an ordinary woman. She had been a member of the Black Panther Party in New York City in the late 1960s, a period of intense political activism and government crackdown on black radical organizations. She was arrested in 1969, charged with conspiracy to bomb police stations and department stores across New York City, and spent time in jail while pregnant with Tupac. She famously chose to represent herself in court while pregnant and was acquitted of all charges in 1971, just weeks before Tupac was born. The legal mind, the fighting spirit, the refusal to be broken by a system designed to crush her, these were the gifts she passed to her son before he could even speak. Tupac's biological father, Billy Garland, was also a Black Panther, but he was not in Tupac's life. Tupac told the journalist Kevin Powell in a 1996 interview,
I thought my father was dead all my life. I felt I needed a daddy to show me the ropes, and I didn't have one. He did not see his father again until he was 23 years old. That wound, that specific fatherless wound, runs through every line of music Tupac ever made. The early years of Tupac Shakur's childhood were marked by instability, poverty, and constant movement. Afeni struggled to find work. The family relied on welfare. They moved frequently, sometimes staying in shelters. In a 1996 biography excerpt, a classmate recalled Tupac telling people that his family had left New York because someone was shot inside their home, which was not true, but which spoke to a young boy learning early that the story you tell about yourself is its own form of survival. In 1984, when Tupac was 13 years old, Afeni moved the family to Baltimore, Maryland. They arrived in a row house on Greenmount Avenue that was, by multiple accounts, barely livable. Paint chipping from the ceilings, floors slanted at strange angles, rodent droppings along the floorboards, paper-thin walls, no heating unit, pipes that froze in winter. This was not a home. This was a place to endure. And yet, something extraordinary happened to Tupac Shakur in Baltimore. Something that no one, perhaps least of all Tupac himself, could have predicted. He was enrolled at the Baltimore School of the Arts, a prestigious magnet school that offered free tuition and instruction in acting, poetry, jazz, and ballet. For a boy who had grown up feeling displaced and defined by what he did not have, the school was a revelation. He studied Shakespeare. He performed in school plays. He danced in a production of The Nutcracker as the Mouse King. He wrote poetry. He delivered his first rap performance at that school. He organized a rally in support of Baltimore's first Black American mayoral candidate. And he made a friend who would remain significant to him for the rest of his life, a girl named Jada Pinkett, who would later become the actor Jada Pinkett Smith. Tupac would later say of Baltimore and the art school, "It was the freest I ever felt." Think about that. A 13-year-old boy living in a crumbling row house with no heating, raised by a mother battling addiction, with no father and no stability. And the place that made him feel the freest he ever felt was a school where he could act and dance and write. That tells you who Tupac Shakur really was underneath all of the mythology that came later. But freedom did not last. In 1988, the family moved again, this time to Marin City, California, a community that Tupac would later describe without affection. It was in Marin City that Afeni's crack cocaine addiction took full hold, and Tupac found himself in the crushing position of watching his mother deteriorate on the same streets where he was sometimes selling drugs himself to survive. The boy who had danced the Nutcracker and performed Shakespeare was now a teenager navigating one of the most brutal possible combinations of circumstances: poverty, addiction in his household, and a neighborhood defined by street violence. And yet, even there, in the middle of all of that, something in Tupac refused to be extinguished. In the spring of 1989, he met a poetry teacher named Layla Steinberg in an Oakland park where she was running poetry sessions. She saw something in him immediately. She eventually became his manager, and through her connections he found his way to the hip-hop group Digital Underground, first as a roadie and backup dancer, then as a rapper. The door was opening, the trajectory was set. What came next was the most extraordinary 5 years in the history of American music.
In 1991, Tupac Shakur released his debut solo album, Tupacalypse Now. He was 20 years old. The album was raw and confrontational and politically charged. It addressed police brutality, systemic racism, teen pregnancy, poverty, and the specific terror of being a young black man in America. It was not a comfortable album. It was not designed to be. It was the album of a young man who had grown up watching the world fail the people he loved and who had decided to name that failure out loud, in rhyme, with a voice that could not be ignored. In 1993, he starred alongside Janet Jackson in the film Poetic Justice. In 1994, he formed a rap group called Thug Life. By 1996, he had released a string of albums that had made him the best-selling hip-hop artist in the world. His double album, All Eyes on Me, released in February 1996, is one of the best-selling rap albums in American history. He sold more than 75 million records worldwide over the course of a career that lasted just 5 years. 5 years. The mind struggles to process what that means. But alongside the music, there was another Tupac, the one the tabloids and the prosecutors and the court records documented. In October 1993, in Atlanta, Tupac shot 2 off-duty police officers who he maintained were harassing a black motorist. The case was dropped when it was discovered the officers were intoxicated. In 1994, he served 15 days in jail for assault and battery. In late 1994, he was shot 5 times in the lobby of a New York recording studio in what he and many others believed was a targeted ambush, and survived. In 1995, he was convicted of sexual assault of a female fan at a New York hotel and served 8 months of a 4.5-year sentence before being released on bail while appealing. The bail was posted by Death Row Records CEO Marin Suge Knight, and it came with a condition: Tupac would sign with Death Row Records. That deal, made from a prison cell, set in motion the chain of events that would lead directly to Las Vegas, to a white Cadillac, and to 4 bullets. The relationship between Tupac and Death Row Records and between Tupac and Suge Knight is one of the most complicated and consequential in the history of American music. Knight was a physically imposing man with deep ties to the mob Piru Bloods in Compton, California. Death Row Records had produced some of the defining albums of early 1990s West Coast hip-hop. And when Knight bailed Tupac out of prison and brought him to the label, Tupac threw himself into the work with almost supernatural intensity. He recorded All Eyes on Me, a double album, in just 2 weeks. He was recording music at a pace that alarmed even his collaborators. He seemed to understand, at some level, that time was short. Whether that was genuine premonition or simply the urgency of a man who had nearly been killed twice and knew the world he was moving through, the music he made in those final months of his life carries a weight that has never faded. By the summer of 1996, Tupac Shakur was the most famous rapper on the planet. He was also one of the most targeted. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry, a cultural and commercial conflict between Bad Boy Records in New York, home of the notorious B.I.G., and Death Row Records in Los Angeles, home of Tupac, had by this point gone from a music industry beef to something that carried the genuine threat of violence. Words had been exchanged in songs, public statements had been made, insults had escalated. And on the street level, the affiliations that both labels carried, Death Row with the mob Piru Bloods, Bad Boy with various East Coast connections, meant that what looked like a rap feud from the outside was, from the inside, something far more dangerous. Tupac was 25 years old, at the absolute peak of his powers, in the middle of a war he had not fully started but was determined not to lose. And in early September 1996, Tupac agreed to travel to Las Vegas to attend a boxing match, a decision that would cost him everything.
September 7th, 1996, Las Vegas, Nevada, the MGM Grand Garden Arena. The entire world of boxing and hip-hop and entertainment has descended on the city for a heavyweight championship fight, Mike Tyson versus Bruce Seldon. Tyson was at the peak of his fearsome reputation, and the fight, though it lasted less than 2 minutes, Tyson knocking Seldon down twice in the first round for a TKO, was a spectacle that drew thousands of people to Las Vegas from across the country. Tupac was there with Suge Knight and the Death Row entourage. The evening was festive, electric, the kind of Las Vegas night that feels like nothing can go wrong because everything is too big and too bright and too loud for anything dark to find its way in. That sense of invincibility lasted until the fight ended and the crowd began to move through the lobby of the MGM Grand. In the lobby of the MGM Grand after the fight, a man named Trayvon Lane, a member of the Mob Piru gang and an associate of Death Row Records, spotted a young man moving through the crowd. The young man's name was Orlando Anderson, known on the street as Baby Lane. He was 21 years old, a member of the Southside Compton Crips, the Mob Piru's rivals. Lane recognized Anderson as the person who, back in July 1996, had been part of a group of Southside Crips who attempted to steal his Death Row Records medallion at a Foot Locker store in a California mall. Lane told Tupac, and Tupac, whose own history with violence had never made him cautious, moved toward Anderson. He asked Anderson whether he was from the South, meaning the Southside Crips, and when Anderson did not respond quickly enough to satisfy him, Tupac hit him in the face, knocking him to the ground. Knight's entourage joined in the assault. The MGM Grand security cameras captured everything. Hotel security broke up the fight and the parties separated. What happened in the hours between that lobby brawl and the shooting is a chain of decisions, movements, and communications that investigators would spend 27 years trying to fully reconstruct. Tupac returned to the Luxor Hotel. He disclosed to his girlfriend, Kadada Jones, that he had been in a fight. He had promised to return to her after the boxing match, but was now planning to go to a club. He left the Luxor. The death row convoy, multiple vehicles, began moving through the Las Vegas Strip toward a nightclub called Club 662, which was co-owned by Suge Knight. It was a warm Saturday night in Las Vegas. The Strip was crowded. The city was alive. At 11 o'clock in the evening, Tupac and Suge Knight were stopped briefly by Las Vegas Metropolitan Bike Patrol officers for playing their car stereo too loudly and for not having license plates. The plates were found in the trunk of Knight's BMW. They were released without being cited a few minutes later. It was perhaps the last ordinary moment of Tupac Shakur. At 11:15 in the evening, the black BMW carrying Tupac Shakur in the front passenger seat and Suge Knight at the wheel was stopped at a red light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Covell Lane, in front of the Maxim Hotel. A vehicle occupied by two women had pulled up on their left. Tupac, who was leaning partially out of the passenger side window and talking to the women, invited them to come to Club 662. The mood was light, the night was still young. And then, from the right side of the vehicle, a white four-door late-model Cadillac pulled up alongside Knight's BMW. The window of the Cadillac rolled down. The shooter in the back seat opened fire with a .40 caliber Glock 22 pistol. At least 13 rounds were fired into the BMW. Tupac Shakur was struck 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the arm, once in the thigh. Knight was grazed by a bullet fragment in the head. The white Cadillac accelerated and disappeared into the Las Vegas night. It was never found. The shooter was not arrested that night, not for 27 years after that. Suge Knight, despite the bullet graze to his head, pulled a U-turn and drove east on Flamingo Road. They were stopped by the Las Vegas Bike Patrol, the same officers who had stopped them minutes before. Paramedics arrived and transported Tupac to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada. He was conscious when he arrived. He reportedly said he was dying while being carried into the emergency room. Surgeons operated. His right lung, shredded by 3 of the bullets, was removed. Doctors cut through the famous Thug Life tattoo on his chest to reach the destroyed lung. In the days that followed, the world held its breath. Initial reports gave him a 50-50 chance of survival. By day 4, that had dropped to 1 in 5. For 6 days, Tupac Shakur fought from a hospital bed in Las Vegas, while the world outside his room began to fracture with grief and fear and the particular rage of people who had seen this coming and could not stop it. On September 13, 1996, at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Tupac Amaru Shakur was pronounced dead. He was 25 years old. He had been alive for 9,222 days, and the world has never been quite the same.
The investigation into Tupac Shakur's murder began immediately and stalled almost as fast. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department launched a homicide investigation, but from the very first hours, the probe ran into a wall that would define the next 2.5 decades of the case, the wall of silence. Suge Knight, who had been in the car when Tupac was shot, told investigators he heard something but saw nothing. His statement, according to police, did nothing to advance the investigation. Members of Tupac's entourage, many of whom had been present at or near the scene, declined to cooperate with investigators.
The code of silence that governed both the street gang world and, to a significant degree, the hip-hop world of the 1990s meant that people who may have seen the white Cadillac, who may have recognized the shooter, who may have known exactly what happened and why, chose to say nothing. The Las Vegas police also failed to follow up with a key witness, a rapper named Keffe, who told police he could identify one or more of the assailants. 2 months after Tupac's murder, Keffe was shot and killed. He took whatever he knew with him. By 1997, just 1 year after the murder, the lead investigator on the case, Las Vegas Sergeant Kevin Manning, told the Las Vegas Sun investigative reporter Kathy Scott that Tupac's murder may never be solved. That statement, made just 12 months after the killing, captures the depth of the institutional failure that followed. A 2002 investigation by the Los Angeles Times, published as a 2-part series by reporter Chuck Phillips, concluded after a year of reporting that the shooting had been carried out by members of the Southside Compton Crips as retaliation for the lobby beating of Orlando Anderson. The investigation specifically named Anderson as the person who fired the fatal shots. Las Vegas police, the Times reported, had interviewed Anderson only once, briefly, and had discounted him as a suspect because of the short time between the hotel beating and the murder. The same investigation found that Las Vegas police had mismanaged the probe from the beginning, failing to follow up on leads, failing to secure witnesses, and ultimately allowing the case to cool to the point where solving it seemed almost impossible. Orlando Anderson himself denied any involvement in Tupac's murder. In a 1997 interview with Vibe magazine and in subsequent statements, he said he was a fan of Tupac's music and had nothing to do with the shooting. In 1998, Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur, filed a wrongful death suit against Anderson in response to a lawsuit Anderson himself had filed against Suge Knight and Death Row Records. The wrongful death case never went to trial. On May 29, 1998, Orlando Anderson was shot and killed in an unrelated gang shootout in Compton, California. He was 23 years old. Whatever Orlando Anderson knew about the night of September 7, 1996, died with him on a Compton street 2 years later. And the case, already cold, grew colder still. For years, the investigation existed primarily as a cultural conversation rather than an active legal pursuit. True crime books were written, documentaries were produced, theories circulated endlessly online and in fan communities. Some people believed the East Coast-West Coast feud was the motive and that Bad Boy Records associates had offered money to have Tupac killed. Others believed it was purely about the Anderson beating, a street retaliation that happened within hours. Others believed that Suge Knight himself had arranged the murder for business reasons. None of these theories were proven, none were prosecuted, and for almost 2 decades the case appeared to be exactly what that 1997 investigator had feared it would be, permanently, hopelessly unsolved. Then something changed, and it changed remarkably because one man,
Duane Keith D., known as Keffe D., was born in Compton, California. He was a high-ranking member of the Southside Compton Crips, specifically a senior figure, a shot caller, within the Burris Street crew. In the gangland hierarchy of South Compton in the 1990s, a shot caller was exactly what the title suggests, someone with the authority to order violence and the standing to ensure it was carried out. Davis was Orlando Anderson's uncle. He was present by his own admission on the night of September 7, 1996 in Las Vegas. He was, according to prosecutors, in the front passenger seat of the white Cadillac that pulled up alongside Suge Knight's BMW at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. He was there, he saw what happened, and for years he was protected from prosecution by a legal concept that law enforcement officers around the world know and despise, the right against self-incrimination, which, in essence, meant that as long as Davis was the one providing testimony and cooperating with investigators, he could not easily be charged based on his own statements. What Davis did with that protection is almost unbelievable in retrospect. He talked in interviews, he talked on camera. He gave detailed accounts of what happened on the night of the shooting. In a recorded conversation with retired Los Angeles Police Department detective Greg Kading, who first interviewed Davis in 2008, Davis described the events of the night in considerable detail.
In a separate recording that Las Vegas police describe as having been obtained covertly, a 2009 conversation, Davis told detectives, "We at the light on Las Vegas and Flamingo. He, Suge, Tupac hanging out the window, all the girls was going crazy on the corner." He described maneuvering the gun toward the back seat. He described his nephew, Orlando Anderson, grabbing the weapon. Orlando said, "Give it here, I'll shoot," Davis reportedly said. These were not small admissions. These were not ambiguous statements. This was a man describing his presence at the scene of a murder and the actions that led to it, in enough detail that prosecutors would later build a criminal case around his own words. In 2019, he went further still. He published a memoir titled Compton Street Legend, in which he described being in the Cadillac with Tupac's murderer on the night of the killing. He described hearing the shots come from the back seat of the vehicle. He wrote, with what can only be described as extraordinary candor given what was coming, "For us, Vegas was another day at the office." These were his words, his memoir, his account, and prosecutors would later tell a court that those words, combined with the recorded interviews, the television appearances, and the documented history of Davis's role, constituted the foundation of their case against him. The question of why it took 27 years to arrest someone who had been publicly discussing his proximity to the murder for over a decade is one that deserves a direct answer. And that answer is complicated, instructive, and in some ways, damning. Let me stop here and address this directly, because the question of why it took from September 1996 to September 2023 to make an arrest in this case is one that millions of people have asked, and that the answer reveals something important about both the law and the investigation. The first and most significant reason is the legal protection Davis enjoyed as long as he was providing information rather than being formally targeted. As long as investigators were talking to Davis as a source, gathering intelligence about other cases, including potentially the murder of the notorious B.I.G., which occurred in March 1997, Davis had an implicit degree of protection. He understood that protection, he used it, and he apparently believed it would extend indefinitely. The second reason is the code of silence that surrounded the entire case from the beginning. Without witnesses willing to testify, without physical evidence tying specific individuals to the crime, the white Cadillac was never recovered, no murder weapon was ever found, the DNA era of forensic investigation had limited application to this particular case. Prosecutors faced an almost impossible task of building a case that could survive a jury trial. What changed was Davis's own behavior. When he began making public statements in the documentary, in media interviews, in his published memoir, he effectively waived the protections he had previously relied upon. Las Vegas County Sheriff Kevin McMail says simply, "Tupac is one of those people that sort of transcends his own death. He and his family deserve a police department that goes after justice." In July 2023, the Las Vegas County Police Department executed a search warrant on a home in Henderson, Nevada, a home belonging to the wife of Duane Davis. Whatever investigators found in that search gave them what they needed. On September 29, 2023, exactly 27 years and 22 days after Tupac Shakur was shot on the Las Vegas Strip, officers arrested Duane "Keffe D." Davis. A grand jury had indicted him on one count of murder with the use of a deadly weapon. He was 60 years old. He was taken into custody in Henderson. He has been held without bail ever since at the Clark County Detention Center, and for the first time in 27 years, the case that everyone said would never be solved had a defendant in custody.
What exactly do prosecutors have against Duane Davis? This is the question that will be answered or not answered when that trial begins on August 10, 2026. But based on public court filings and verified reporting, the prosecution's case rests on several pillars. The first is Davis's own words, the interviews, the documentary appearances, the memoir, in which he placed himself in the white Cadillac on the night of the murder, described the movements of the gun, and described his nephew's actions. The second is the recorded conversations with investigators in 2008 and 2009, in which Davis provided detailed accounts of the night that corroborate the prosecution's timeline. The third is the testimony of retired LAPD detective Greg Kading, who interviewed Davis and whose investigation formed a significant part of the foundation for the eventual arrest.
And the fourth is whatever physical or documentary evidence was recovered in the July 2023 search of the Henderson home that triggered the grand jury indictment. Chief Deputy District Attorney Mark DiGiacomo described Davis at the time of the arrest as the, quote, on-ground, on-site commander who, quote, ordered the death. That is an extraordinary claim, and it is one that the defense vigorously contests. Davis has maintained since his arrest that he is innocent. He told ABC News in a jailhouse interview in March 2025, "I'm innocent. I ain't killed nobody, never did ever kill nobody." His defense team has argued that his previous statements were made for entertainment purposes, that he was embellishing and performing for audiences who wanted drama and street credibility, not that he was confessing to involvement in a homicide. Whether a jury will find that argument credible, given the specificity and consistency of Davis's various accounts over more than a decade, is the central question the August 2026 trial will have to answer. The defense has also introduced competing theories. Davis's attorneys have suggested that a former security employee for Death Row Records named Reggie Wright Jr. may bear responsibility for the murder. Wright has vehemently denied any involvement and has expressed emotional distress at the suggestion. The defense filed motions claiming new witness testimony from a private investigator could prove that Davis was not in Las Vegas at the time of the shooting, a claim that, if substantiated, would collapse the prosecution's case entirely. A Las Vegas district court judge granted the defense the additional time it requested to investigate these claims, resetting the trial date to August 10, 2026. The evidence, described by Davis's own attorney as voluminous, continues to be reviewed. Prosecutors did not oppose the delay.
Before we talk about what this trial means and where the case stands right now, I want to stop and talk about the people who have lived with this loss for nearly 30 years. Because in all the mythology and the street codes and the legal arguments and the courtroom delays, it is easy to lose sight of what this case actually is at its core: the murder of a 25-year-old man, a son, an artist, a human being who deserved to live out his life. Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother, the Black Panther who defended herself in court while pregnant, who raised her children alone through addiction and poverty, who watched her son become one of the most famous human beings on the planet and then buried him at 25, spent the rest of her life fighting for her son's memory and his justice. She filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Orlando Anderson. She established the Tupac Amaru Shakur Foundation to support arts education for young people. She became the executor of Tupac's estate and worked tirelessly to protect and promote his musical legacy. Afeni Shakur died on May 2, 2016, 20 years after her son, from cardiac arrest. She was 69 years old. She never saw an arrest in her son's case. Kidada Jones, Tupac's girlfriend, was waiting for him at the Luxor Hotel on the night of the shooting. He had promised to return to her after the fight. He never did. She has spoken in interviews over the years about the specific cruelty of that last conversation, the ordinary intimacy of a promise made before everything changed. Jada Pinkett Smith, who had been Tupac's closest friend since their Baltimore School of the Arts days, has spoken publicly many times about the grief of losing him, a grief she described in a 2023 interview as something she has never fully processed, a loss that sits differently from other losses because of who he was and what they were to each other. And there is the broader community, the millions of people around the world for whom Tupac's music was not entertainment, but testimony, not background noise, but a direct voice speaking to experiences they had lived and pain they had carried. These were the people who gathered outside the University Medical Center when he died. These are the people who still buy his albums, still quote his lyrics, still leave flowers at memorials on the anniversary of his death. For them, justice has never been an abstract concept. It has been a 28-year wait. It is worth pausing to consider just how remarkable Tupac Shakur's legacy is, not as a cultural footnote, but as a living, continuing force in the world. His song, Dear Mama, a tribute to his mother, Afeni, that described with painful honesty both her struggles with addiction and his unconditional love for her, was added to the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry in 2010, making him only the third rapper to be so honored. The Library of Congress described it as a moving and eloquent homage to both the murdered rapper's own mother and all mothers struggling to maintain a family in the face of addiction, poverty, and societal indifference. In 2017, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility, an extraordinary honor that was also, for many people, a bittersweet reminder of everything that was taken. His double album, All Eyes on Me, was certified 10 times platinum in 2014, almost 20 years after his death. His greatest hits album remains one of the best-selling albums in American history. But the numbers do not capture it. What Tupac Shakur meant and still means to millions of people around the world is not measurable in album sales or streaming figures. He was a poet who wrote what he saw. He was an actor who could inhabit roles that demanded genuine emotional depth. He was a political thinker shaped by the radicalism of his parents and by his own experience of a society that claimed to offer opportunity while systematically denying it to people who looked like him. He was also contradictory and imperfect, and sometimes self-destructive and capable of serious harm to others. The sexual assault conviction is a fact of his record that cannot be and should not be erased. He was a human being, in full, with all the complexity that implies. And that complexity, the gap between the beauty of his best art and the damage of his worst choices, is part of what makes him such an enduring and contested figure. He never had the chance to grow into whatever he might have become after 25. That is the specific cruelty of a life cut short. We will never know.
As of April 2026, the trial of Duane Keffe D is scheduled to begin on August 10th of this year in Las Vegas, Nevada. Davis is 62 years old. He has been incarcerated at the Clark County Detention Center since September 2023. He changed his legal team in August 2024, hiring attorneys Robert Draskevich and Michael Pandulo to represent him after he was convicted of fighting another inmate while in custody and sentenced to 16 to 40 months in prison with credit for time served. His new legal team immediately requested additional time to review what they described as a voluminous amount of discovery material. Decades of police reports, witness interviews, recorded conversations, and forensic documentation. Prosecutors did not oppose the request. The trial was reset for August 10, 2026. What will happen at that trial? No one knows. What we know is this. The prosecution will present Davis's own words as their most powerful evidence. They will argue that a man who spent years telling the world he was in the car on the night of the shooting, who described the weapon being passed to the back seat, who described hearing the shots fired, cannot now claim that those words meant nothing. The defense will argue that those words were performance, not confession, the storytelling of a man playing a character for an audience that expected street credibility. They will challenge the physical evidence, the timeline, the reliability of witnesses, and the consistency of the prosecution's theory of the case. They will attempt to introduce alternative suspects and alternative explanations. And 12 ordinary people in a Las Vegas courtroom will have to decide, beyond a reasonable doubt, whether Duane Keith Davis, Keffe D, is guilty of first-degree murder in the killing of Tupac Amaru Shakur. The burden of proof is on the prosecution. Reasonable doubt is a high bar, and the case is, by any honest assessment, complicated. The primary witnesses to the shooting are dead or have declined to cooperate. The murder weapon has never been recovered. The white Cadillac has never been found. The events of that night in September 1996 have been filtered through nearly 3 decades of interviews, memoirs, documentaries, street mythology, and legal strategy. Separating the truth from the performance, the actual facts of what happened on Flamingo Road from the stories that have been built around those facts in the years since, will be the central challenge of this trial. And whether justice, after 28 years, can finally find Tupac Shakur in that Las Vegas courtroom is a question that the world is watching to be answered.
Even if Duane Davis is convicted, certain questions about this case will remain unanswered. Who actually pulled the trigger? Davis did not fire the weapon, according to every account, including his own. He allegedly ordered it.
The person prosecutors believe fired the fatal shots, Orlando Anderson, has been dead since 1998. He was never charged, he was never tried, he was never convicted. If the prosecution's theory is correct, the man who actually shot Tupac Shakur escaped justice entirely, killed in an unrelated shooting 2 years later, and can never be held accountable in any court on earth. The others allegedly in the Cadillac that night, Terrence or T. Brown, who reportedly drove the car, and DeAndre or Big Dre, who was reportedly also in the back seat, are both dead as well. Brown was found shot to death in Compton in September 2015. Smith reportedly died of natural causes in 2004. Of the 4 people allegedly in that white Cadillac on the night of September 7, 1996, only Duane Davis is alive and facing trial. The others have all been claimed by the same world of violence that claimed Tupac himself. Why did it take so long? That question has been partly answered in this documentary. The wall of silence, the failed early investigation, the legal protections Davis relied upon, and ultimately his own public statements that gave prosecutors what they needed. But there is a deeper question beneath it. Would this case have been pursued as aggressively, as persistently, as ultimately successfully as it has been if the victim had not been Tupac Shakur, one of the most famous human beings who ever lived? Thousands of murders go unsolved every year in the United States, hundreds of thousands over the past several decades, according to the Murder Accountability Project. Most of those victims are not famous. Most of those cases are not covered by documentaries and true crime channels and global media organizations. Most of those families wait in silence for a justice that never comes. The question of why some cases get solved and others do not is ultimately a question about what we value and whose lives we are prepared to fight for. It is not a comfortable question. It is an essential one.
Tupac Amaru Shakur would have been 54 years old this June. 54. Old enough to have watched the children of the people who loved his music grow up listening to it themselves. Old enough to have seen the world he wrote about change in some ways and remain devastatingly unchanged in others. Old enough to have continued writing, to have given us decades more of whatever he was capable of making, which by any measure was extraordinary. Instead, he is frozen at 25, in the photographs, in the album covers, in the music videos and the films, forever young in the way that only the dead can be. And somewhere in Las Vegas, in a courtroom that will open its doors on August 10, 2026, the closest thing to justice that this case will ever produce is about to begin. Whether that justice is sufficient, whether one aging man in a detention center charged 27 years after the fact with a murder carried out by others who are all now dead represents the full reckoning that Tupac's life and death deserved, is a question each of you watching this will have to answer for yourselves. What I can tell you is this: the case is real, the trial is real, the evidence is real, and for the first time in the 28-year history of this wound, there is a chance, not a certainty, but a genuine chance that something like an accounting will happen. For Afeni Shakur, who was gone, for Kidada Jones, who waited, for Jada Pinkett Smith, who still carries it, for the millions of people around the world for whom Tupac's voice was something more than music, and for a 25-year-old boy from East Harlem who danced the Nutcracker, performed Shakespeare, wrote poetry in Baltimore, and became one of the greatest artists his generation ever produced. His name was Tupac Amaru Shakur, and he deserved better than what the world gave him. Now it is finally time to find out if the world is willing to give him at least this much: the truth, told in open court, under oath, with consequences. Drop a comment below right now. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what you think is going to happen on August 10th in that Las Vegas courtroom. Tell me whether you believe Keffe D is guilty. This community exists because of you. Every comment, every subscription, every share pushes this story further and keeps Tupac's name alive in the conversation where it belongs. If this documentary moved you even 1% as much as making it moved me, please subscribe to the Untold True Crime Stories. Hit that notification bell and come back next week because we have another case waiting in the dark.
and we are going to tell it the same way we told this one, completely, honestly, and without flinching. Justice for Tupac.